This radiator just ain't gonna cut it. The problem is that the radiator is so close to the engine that I can't move the fan back and make a proper shroud. So what I'm gonna have to do is just get a different radiator that can sit on top of this cross member right here. That way that'll push the whole radiator up against the front of the grill, and then I have enough room to make a shroud and have a fan on the back. Because, hey, she's creeping up to, you know, almost 210 just from maybe a quarter mile of trail. So that isn't gonna work. That's right, we're gonna rotary swap the Willys. We're gonna call it the Winkle Willys. Maybe it'll run better than that mud engine that we had in there. There she is. It only took me about, maybe 3 hours. Working at a kind of a slow pace to get this thing out. All my wiring is quick disconnect, so it's just unplug, kind of a plug and play type system. You know, the cable is super easy to get out, so the ground wires come out super easy. In the mutt, it's easier to pull the engine out with the bell housing still on, because it's almost impossible to just slide the bell housing off the engine. You got to kind of pull it upwards. But it actually came out of the Jeep pretty easy. So why are we pulling out of the Jeep, you may ask? So I'm enjoying the Jeep around. I kept hearing metallic sounds, and they're getting worse and worse, and I didn't know if it was the body rubbing together somewhere over here, if it came from the bell housing area. Well, it turns out that the pressure plate, one of the little springs on there, actually broke. So you look at the pressure plate, you'll notice that there's a goofy little spring clip right here, and you'll notice that it is missing up here. See, that one's got it, that one does not have it. That somehow came off. I don't know if it was just a bad pressure plate or what the story is, but you can see that that chunk of metal's been bouncing around inside the bell housing, and it's just kind of dinged up everything around here. It's there's some nasty spots on this flywheel that you can file it out and be okay. But I think I've got a spare flywheel off the other engine that I took out of the Jeep. This one we ended up doing a compression test because it's running so poorly. But we found that it was a 130, 130, 140, 140. So she's got good compression. So what we're going to do is mess with, make sure that the valves are all, make sure the valves are in good clearance. Mess with the timing again. Mess with some carb settings. So what we're going to do now is just kind of pull this thing off and see what the clutch itself looks like. Since the Jeep was running so poorly and these clutches are notorious in a mutt. They're not that powerful. They're not that strong. So you'll see the later style mutts, they went to what's called a puck style clutch, where instead of having a fiber disc all the way around, there's just these small sections of brass that went around it, maybe 5 or 6 little pads, and it was super abrasive and really gripped the flywheel. But it's like driving a race car. You can't really feather that clutch very well. It just tears up the flywheel. So they're known to be kind of weak, and when we're out in the trail, if you get the wheels in a tight bind with those big meaty tractor tires, it will actually spin the clutch. We're in a really nasty spot where instead of just bogging the engine and killing it, when I dumped the clutch per se, it was just spinning this, and it smoked a little bit, and I didn't really like having a smoked clutch kind of sitting in there. And I can still smell it when I took this thing off. That's all I could smell. So just out of curiosity, I bought a new clutch for it, and the mutt uses a CJ2A pressure plate, but it uses its own clutch just because it's got a different number of splines on the inside. So we're gonna go ahead and pull this thing off and see how it looks. Pretty smooth. That makes me happy. This is a little She got some. Alrighty, here's the OG clutch. Here's a new clutch. This one seems to be a little bit more sturdier than this one. It's got a lot of, open spots in it, but, it's got a lot beefier. It's only got 4 springs, but they're a lot more beefy than these springs here. And, so you're looking at just the material depth of them. Yeah, they're about the same, so. Alrighty, more destruction of the submarine Jeep. So I screwed up last time. I made a mistake. When I went to shim the pinion in and out of the case, for those of you who know about axles, I went to shim it out, but instead of putting the shims behind the bearing races, I put them on the other side. Basically, instead of shimming it from... God, I can't even talk, I'm so exhausted. I don't even know what I'm done. What is it, like 1 in the morning? 1:20. Instead of shimming the bearing race, I added shims to the bearing preload. So like an idiot, so you might not be able to see in there, but I basically pushed the bearing outside of the shims. No. Gosh, I pushed the bearing outside of the race. So if this is a race, the bearing would sit, back in through here. Instead, it was sitting out here. And I don't know how I didn't notice this. And another problem that I had is that I didn't notice this until I pulled it apart. The bearing on the end of the shaft towards the yoke actually wouldn't even slide over the shaft. All the way it's getting hung up. So that was throwing me off along with the way I shimmed it, which was pretty messed up. So overall, it was not a good situation. So basically what happened is, driving down the road, my feet are kind of rumbling, feel a little bit of vibration, and I pull over and I notice I grab the drive shaft and it's wiggling up and down, and I was like, oh, this is screwed up. So when I tore it apart, I found those 2 problems. So basically I bought new bearings back there, new shims, I got it shimmed out. Luckily I didn't have to shim the carrier side to side, that was perfect. So now my tooth pattern is perfect, the backlash is perfect, bearing preload is perfect, so she's ready to go back together. And then we can work on the scubas. We got a little upgrade for the old submarine Jeep here. So this is the original style pilot bearing that presses into the flywheel that the trainee input shaft goes into. Now you notice something weird, it's sealed on this side, but not sealed on this side. So this side would go towards the engine like this. And people debate, should you grease this, should you not grease it? If you do grease it, you'll hear squeaking. If not, you'll hear squeaking. It's just a big mess. So it's not really weatherproof. You go out in the mud and the water, it's just gonna tear that to pieces. So what we did is found a very similar bearing, and the part number is 62022RSC3 from Ancan Bearings, and this one is sealed on both sides. Now it is a tick wider. You can see that in my left hand, a little bit wider than this one. So what you want to do is when you're pressing in the flywheel, you're going to press it flush to the front. And the reason why you press it just flush, don't go any further into the flywheel, is because imagine this would be the crankshaft of the engine. The flywheel kind of sits over the crankshaft to center it up on the crank. So you don't want to press the bearing in too far, or else it'll push the flywheel away from the engine. Alright, we're trying to get the bearing flush to the top of the flywheel, which pressing on with this nut, it'll actually get us there, because the nut will stop pressing once we get flush. And there we go. Check that. Not bad at all. Yep. Rolling. Yeah, we got fuel now. else wants to buy it. Alrighty, the old Snorkel has been long awaited to finally go on the roll cage. So I got going on the inside here. So I got an inline air cleaner with temporary hose clamps. Runs to the carburetor, all the way over here. So the problem is, you can't just have the hose running out willy-nilly. So the problem is you can't just have the hose slacking around, especially with the bend I gotta do. It's gotta sit approximately right here. So what we've got are these fancy things. So these are very small. They use a little rivet. You drill a 3/16 hole in the body. You set that in, you rivet it, then you can run a zip tie through it. So we'll put that under here, set the hose over it, zip tie it, and keep that thing in place, and we'll be able to do that across the whole side of it.